Hi everyone. Before the year is out, I thought I'd do a last Q&A and respond to a few of the comments I've had over the last few months. In the description below, I'll provide a timestamp in case you want to skip over anything or return to it. Starting with this one from Ernesta. Do I think men can be radical feminists? Well, I don't consider myself an authority on radical feminism. I agree with the radical feminist analysis of the patriarchy, but in my days, it was just called feminism. I kind of think radical feminism excludes men by definition, but that doesn't mean that men can't support it. I define feminism as a movement for women's liberation, and it is, in my opinion, absolutely possible for men to genuinely and sincerely support feminist principles and objectives. My husband is such a man. I hope and believe my son is also such a man. But personally, I would prefer that men would refrain from calling themselves feminists of any stripe and stuck to calling themselves supporters or allies. I have met too many self-declared male feminists to believe that men can easily remove themselves from their power and privilege in relation to women. In the past several years, I've repeatedly had men telling me I'm not a feminist because I don't accept that men who call themselves women, who claim to be women, are indeed women. And not once has any of them offered their reasoning for why my views disqualify me from feminism, and it feels like they don't think they have to offer reasoning. They are men, and what they say goes. And even before I hit peak trans and got interested in the topic of gender ideology, it must be about 6 or 7 years ago, I remember joining a self-declared feminist group on Facebook. And when I got in there, I saw men telling women off and telling them what to do and what feminism is. It was like they couldn't help themselves. So I'm over men calling themselves feminists, especially this bloke here. For those who can't see, this is Mr. Turdo of Tranada. Ernesta also asks me about kink at the Pride, two subjects I'd rather not think about separately, never mind together. She says, I have pointed out that Pride has become very kinky, to which a lesbian friend told me I was wrong. Kink has always existed at Pride. Do you have any thoughts about this aspect of Pride? Has it always existed? Is it legitimate? Is it good to associate the gay rights movement with kink? Isn't it stigmatizing? Isn't kink about something different than same-sex attraction? Is Pride not only about same-sex attraction, and should it include also sexual liberation, including kink? Well, I'm straight and I have never participated in a Pride event. I've been to the London Pride twice by accident, meaning that I happened to be in the heart of London for other reasons when I found myself surrounded by the Pride, and I hadn't even known it was going to be on, because back in those days, well over a decade ago, it wasn't shoved in one's face ad nauseum every day for what seems like months. I certainly never saw any kind of kink back then, just a lot of people having fun, and I thought it was great, which was why I was happy to wave my daughter and her girlfriend off to the Pride. Not anymore. In recent years, I've seen the photos of disgusting old men dressed as little girls, sucking dummies. I've seen men dressed in latex dog outfits crawling along the road on leashes. I've seen loads of bondage gear, and I don't think it's appropriate to behave like that in front of children. And as long as these events are held during the daytime, there will be kids around. I was pleased to see that a couple of people responded to Ernesta, both gay men, who confirmed that the Pride has changed a lot in their lifetimes and they no longer want anything to do with it. Right. Gerard Deary says, I had mentioned that women, whom I refer to as a class, only got the vote 100 years ago, but when did all men get the vote? His point being that only a tiny number of men had the vote before any women got it. For the overwhelming history of the UK, barely anyone could vote, so I hardly see how a tiny selection of men who could vote, because they were mostly born into the aristocracy, being in class solidarity with the vast majority of men who were their compatriots and couldn't. Well, who said anything about class solidarity? Not me. To put this in context, I'm going to show the clip where I talked about this, which was in my video entitled, What Do I Mean? In this country, only in the last century did women win the right to vote, and for married women to own property in her own name and open bank accounts without a father or husband's permission. Only in my lifetime has there been legislation introduced to prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sex and marital status. So the point is that however powerless men were, they still had power over women. I mention female suffrage as just one of a number of examples that illustrate how women have been treated as less than men, and it's impossible to look at in isolation because voting rights were historically tied to property owning rights. As Gerard said, it was only landed aristocracy who could vote, and most people didn't own property as in houses and land, but all men owned their wives as property. There was nothing in theory to stop a man becoming wealthy and owning swathes of land, whereas only single women could own property, most likely inherited, and very few did. On marriage, any property a woman owned became the property of her husband. There were rare instances of women voting in parliamentary elections prior to the Reform Act of 1832. That act extended the franchise so that more men could vote, while the same act formally excluded all women from voting. It specifically defined a voter as a male person. There were a couple more reform acts extending male franchise further, so after 1884, 60% of men could vote and no women could, even if they were rich and owned property in their own name. The 1918 Representation of the People Act extended the franchise to all men over the age of 21 and to women over the age of 21 for local government elections, but for parliamentary elections only women over the age of 30 who met a minimum property qualification got the vote, and it wasn't until 1928 that there was universal suffrage for everyone over the age of 21, not 25 as Gerard says. So 1928 is the year we will celebrate the centenary of universal suffrage in this country. So I hope that addresses what I understood to be Gerard's point. Now, from Essence. You seem to very heavily rely upon our current lack of understanding about the brain. Surely you are aware that as time goes on and we continue to understand more about it, more evidence about trans brains will become apparent. You can't just play this game of there's not good enough evidence forever, you know. I rather curtly pointed out that it isn't a game. I don't rely on it anyway, and whatever is discovered about the brain in future won't change the fact of our biological sex, and that men need to stay out of our spaces, sports and occupations. That turned out to be a waste of my time because Essence responded thus. Okay, but if science can at some point in future prove the existence of gender identity and prove that trans women are women psychologically just as much as cis women are women psychologically, then you'd have to admit it'd be pretty freaking shallow to deny some women to live as who they are just because they were born with the wrong parts. Oh my God. Surely our brains matter more than our genitals. Matter more to whom? Not to men who rape women and girls, they don't. They don't care about the gender identity of their victims. They don't care what goes on in their brains or what they are psychologically. What the hell is psychologically women supposed to mean anyway? That they prefer soap operas to science fiction? Doesn't matter. You can watch soaps until the second coming. Doesn't happen, but you will never be a woman, because to be a woman you have to be born with a female body. Here's a fun fact. Some men who claim to be psychologically women have used their penises to rape real women, and some women who claim to be men have been raped in their vaginas by actual men. Those who rely heavily on arguments about trans brains are straw-clutching desperados trying to pull the wool over our eyes and gain access to the woman club, and unfortunately they are succeeding with a lot of people who should know better, and that's why we need to keep fighting and never give up. By the way, I am at the moment too angry to even talk about what's happened in Scotland, but I've booked my trip to Glasgow for the 5th of February. Kelly J is holding one of her gigs up there, and I look forward to seeing my Scottish sisters again. Alice Wonder. We are 0.06 of the population. How are we such a threat to you? I think you would have enough to worry about with the other 99%. Well, you could have a point there, Alice. Anyone would think I'd have enough to worry about with the other 99%, but here's another fun fact. The only people who have lied about me, smeared my character and tried to ruin my life have been the people in the gender cult. The only physical violence I have experienced was from people in the gender cult. The people who celebrated that violence and blamed me for it were people like you, and it all happened before I had ever written or spoken a word about transgenderism. How about that? What is the biggest threat to the long-term health and well-being of women and children in Western liberal democracies at the moment? Gender ideology is, and those who promote it. Don't ask me how, because I've already explained it in dozens of videos and I've built a whole website about it. One more thing. Alice also commented below the video I made, just for those trolls who pretend to think that I'm a man. I don't hate you and I don't think you look like a man. I couldn't care less if you did hate me and did think I look like a man. It makes no difference to anything. I did feel you deserved to get a small taste of what you gleefully do to others. I take exception to that. I don't gleefully do anything to anyone else. The only glee I ever see is expressed by trans activists trying and often succeeding in trampling over women's rights. And what are you talking about anyway? Are you saying that because I, as a matter of principle, refuse to go along with a lie and pretend that you are a woman when you're a man, then I deserve to be called a man even though I am a woman? I still get surprised that people are so brainwashed that they apparently think, of course someone who's born male can be a woman, of course he with the bulging penis is a woman, and how hateful of you to refuse to refer to him as she when that's what he wants. People's lives are being ruined by gender ideology, and you're whining about misgendering. Get in the bin. Okay, I've had a couple of questions about differences of sex development, DSDs, formerly known as intersex conditions. The questions were specifically about Swyer syndrome and complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, aka CAIS. This may be the time to reiterate that this channel is about transgenderism and gender ideology. Transgenderism has absolutely nothing to do with DSDs. The overwhelming majority of people who socially and medically transition do not have any kind of DSD, and yet people who do have these conditions are brought up time and time and time again by those defending gender ideology in an attempt to claim that sex is a spectrum, or it's bimodal, it's a car crash of an argument. It makes no sense at all. The existence of DSDs doesn't affect the sex binary. There are just two sexes, male and female. This is not to say that it is all tidy and clear-cut and there is never any ambiguity. There is, although it is very rare. I'm going to show a couple of clips of people with these conditions. The first one has Swyer syndrome, the second has CAIS.
I look completely feminine. I discovered that I have an intersex condition when I was 16. I felt up until that point that I would grow up to be like any other woman in my family. I impatiently waited for my period, and when that day never came, I went in for a routine lab work and an MRI, and it was discovered that my body did not develop gonads or ovaries.
We didn't find out that I had complete androgen insensitivity syndrome until I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I had abdominal pain. My parents were told that I had CAIS, but I was not. Years later, I went ahead and had surgery to remove the internal undescended testes. I was not told what they were actually removing, but rather I was told I had cancer. Flash forward, I obtained my own medical records, and I saw that I had CAIS. I was pretty shocked.
So what sex were they? Both have XY karyotypes, which are typical of males, but people with these conditions do not develop normally as males. They do not have penises, nor do they develop normally as females, but they are born with vulvas, so at birth they are recorded as female. Throughout childhood they look like and are raised as girls, and they believe themselves to be girls who will grow into normal women able to do what women do. It's often not until they are teenagers, when they fail to start menstruating and other expected changes don't start happening, that their conditions are discovered. Now, if you want to know more about these conditions, what causes them and the differences between them, then I would recommend the channel called The Paradox Institute. Zach Elliott makes nice, clear videos explaining everything about sex, and he's done one on Swyer syndrome and one on CAIS and others on other DSDs. But to me, I think what these questions are really about, to me it makes no sense to call these people men. For someone who believes herself to be a girl because of what her body looks like on the outside and has looked like that since birth, to be told at the age of, say, 15 that they must now call themselves a boy and use the boys' facilities at school is just bonkers. I know not everyone agrees. Well, Exhalancic doesn't, but I think most people do. These conditions really aren't the gotcha that some of our detractors think they are. In spite of their Y chromosome, they have followed a developmental pathway that ended up producing a female phenotype, and for this reason they have been treated as and thought of themselves as female their entire lives. Okay, it means the line in a certain couple of songs aren't strictly accurate, but perhaps we could insert the line.
If a person's got a penis, it's a man. If a person's got a penis, it's a man.
If the chromosomes are Y, he will always be a guy, except in a few vanishingly rare congenital cases when he develops a female phenotype. Yeah, and we can do the same to my favourite Mr. Menno song so far.
I guess it must be that Y chromosome can't get away from that Y chromosome.
Which is an absolute masterpiece. Do watch it if you haven't seen it. Now, in my last video, the one reacting to the handmaid Kyla Schuler, I showed this tweet by Artless Feckle Blossom, who is admonishing a white woman saying that she used her lily white privilege to speak over black women and our specific female experiences and then perform a racial microaggression by comparing us to males. This attracted an extraordinary comment from one J. Rising. At least 3 of the women touted as black women on the post shown, touted? What the actual are not black, they are mixed or biracial. You're telling a black woman, a woman of African parentage, that women she calls black are not black because... Here lies the hypocrisy of gender-critical feminists. Excuse me? You can assert very logical arguments and evidence to show how men are not women. It's a biological fact, it's not hard. But how is it then that biracial stroke mixed people are black? Because of their features. I mean, seriously, who appointed you the arbiter of blackness, the authority on who can be called black? If you were to talk about enslaved people working the plantations of the antebellum US South, would you be sure to specify that only some were black as a result of rapes by white slave owners? Some of them were biracial, so not black, according to you. Do you think that when some KKK nutcases decide to massacre black churchgoers, they carefully avoid anyone with a lighter skin in case they're biracial? One of the women featured in that tweet is Linda Bellos, OBE, who is what J. Rising calls biracial. Her father was Nigerian and her mother was Polish and Jewish. I believe biracial is a term Linda would reject, just as she rejects the term mixed race because it includes the word race, of which she argues there is no satisfactory definition. It tends to be reduced to skin colour. She prefers mixed heritage, but she calls herself black, which she argues is a political and inclusive term. A piece she wrote for The Times about 15 years ago starts... As a little girl, I often cried myself to sleep, hoping I'd wake up the next day and be white. Racism from other children, neighbours, teachers and strangers was a daily experience. Linda belongs to the group of people who have suffered horrible racist bullying because she was seen as black. Her tormentors didn't care if one of her parents was white. Would you like to tell her she's no right to call herself black? You know, I would have cited you as the asker of the dumbest question in this particular batch, but you were pipped to the post by this bloke, Alfred. At the beginning of my last video, I referred to our knowledge of the fact that so-called trans women are men and trans men are women, and he said, that is neither a fact nor knowledge. Is this the hill you want to die on? It is indefensible. Yes, Alfred, this is the hill I will die on. That is why I built and maintain a website and a YouTube channel arguing the case for that very same fact. And to say that it is indefensible just makes you sound unhinged, basically. Here's a suggestion. Read my bloody website and watch some more of my videos. That is all. See you soon. Bye.